Thank you very, very much indeed. Before I begin, not that he can sneak into a room like this unnoticed, but I think we ought to give one homebred welcome to Arizona's own NEA President Dennis Van Roekel. And if you're keeping score, that means I'm addressing this body with 3 past presidents of the AEA in attendance. My God, the currency of American dollar denominations isn't this prestigious. Thank you, Joe. It is a pleasure to work in a team with you, with Nydia as our treasurer, with Cheryl Mathis, keeps us, well, all I can say is, she works with Joe and me on a daily basis. You figure it out. I'm still getting used to the introduction as AEA president, I will admit, after 6 years as vice president and 3 as treasurer. And 17 years in the classroom as a high school English teacher in Marana. And after listening to Joe's introduction, and you were very kind, but I have to tell you, I now am more sympathetic to John Wright than I have ever been, because for 6 years he had to wait just to see what I was going to say in the introduction of him as AEA president. John, I understand. But you were very kind. I appreciate that, Joe. Greetings and thank you for so many things. Or as a great man often says when he closes his speeches, much obliged. Much obliged. Means a lot more than thanks. I do wear a lot of hats. So do you. Parents, spouses, we're the children of our own families. We are AEA members, all involved in education from whatever enterprise has brought us in. We are taxpayers, though some would like to forget that. And I hope we are voters. Are we voters? Yes. I hope so. But I do want to talk about one of those roles, and that is as educator. You're all very, very kind, but it is not lost on me that I am almost 7 years out of the classroom now. I can't believe it. 17 years that I enjoyed very much, and I sometimes have to say I was a high school English teacher. You know how it works when you're in public education. It stops being about what you do and becomes who you are very, very quickly from whatever role. And it pulls at me, and I miss it. I really do. I still wake up in the morning feeling like a high school English teacher. I have a 50-minute commute to the office on a good day, and somewhere over that drive I kind of become the AEA president. But when I wake up, I still feel very much like a high school English teacher. We all wear a lot of hats. We're all pulled in many directions right now. We're at odds with things that we shouldn't be at odds with. It has been a year, and it has been a series of years in Arizona that the great civil rights activist Thomas Todd would characterize as full of chaos and controversy, contradiction and confusion. Even armed with the greatest of all causes and callings, it's still easy to lose a sense of ourselves in all of this political chaos and Arizona's confusion. And it's probably something of a cliche for an English teacher to quote Shakespeare. But that's not going to stop me from doing it, because I think it's appropriate. One of my favorite Shakespearean plays is Hamlet. Hamlet is the story of a young man who is absolutely psychologically challenged. I don't claim that that's autobiographical in some way, my fascination with that character. But Hamlet's world is falling apart around him as the play begins. He's having a tough time. His father has been murdered. He finds out very likely that his uncle has committed the murder, and I'm sorry to ruin the ending, but it was written like 400 years ago, and if you haven't read it by now, you don't deserve to be surprised. To make matters worse, his mother appears to have married the murderer. In Shakespeare's time, this was classic tragedy. Today, it's Jerry Springer. Oh, we have a long way to go. One point early in the play, things are so bad that Hamlet says, not being able to rely on anything, not seeing anything around him that he can really count on, he says, well, there's nothing good or bad, but thinking makes it so. Nothing good or bad. There's no code. There's no absolute orientation. There's no moral imperative about what's right or what's wrong. You just invent it as you go. And it leaves him lost. And as he wrestles with this complete dissolution of everything around him, one thing happens. A friend of his, a schoolmate named Horatio, enters the play, and Hamlet says very, very simply, Horatio, or I do forget myself. It's just a greeting, but it says so much. I know you, or I've forgotten everything about me. What he's really saying is, in all of this, you're what I can count on. Well, AEA, or I do forget myself. I know you. We are surrounded by our own chaos. Arizona has lost its way, and we feel it. We're suffering from 2 recessions right now across the state, and we can only get the papers and the media really to focus on one. But we live and work under the weight of 2. Yes, we suffer from an economic recession, there is no doubt about it, from over-reliance on certain industries, the natural ebb and flow, some particularly poor decisions made. We suffer from an economic recession, and it is not the worst of the 2, because we also suffer from an ethical recession. In Arizona, we've turned the clock back some 60 years on how we treat each other, how we regard each other. We look for ways in this state now, or there are those who do, to re-legitimize segregation, absolutely opposite the mission of public schools with their open doors, always open to the community and to the state. So we're caught like Hamlet between 2 worlds. The world that is right now, with all of its chaos and contradiction, and the world that could be. The Arizona we know today is not simply chaotic. It seems bound in chains, held down from the potential of what it could be. And there are too many jailers in this state. Now, I'll give you 3 quick examples, but we're not going to sit around and describe the color of the water that is rising. That's not good enough. But to present context, I'd like to talk about 3 points. First, a land that is practically defined by its ethnic diversity has somehow gotten into a manufactured race war with itself. This was a choice by some to enter. It's a chilling war, and the effect has divided families from themselves and driven students from our schools, and that means driven students from their own futures. Exclusion and segregation, the opposite values of public education, reign. And our schools, this is particularly problematic. Every session, every legislative session, our schools teeter right on the brink of becoming part of this war machine. There are those in public office who want us to report and document the cost of educating undocumented students. And these are the same people who refuse to consider the ethical and economic costs of failing to educate every student in Arizona to the best of our abilities. And we in education know the costs. We know that the costs of illiteracy and ignorance far exceed the cost of educating every student in this state. Second, now, Dennis is a math teacher. Anytime you listen to Dennis Van Rokel, you will get a math lesson. So he probably understands this a little better. I taught English. I don't understand why in a state that has passed 20 years of tax cuts and deferred $2.5 billion of revenue out of the public and away from funding public programs, somehow wonders why it can't balance its own budget every year. I don't understand that. And at the same time it demands college and career readiness be the mission of all of our schools, It's practically cut access off from the middle class to higher education, and it's cut $1.5 billion out of K-12 funding over the last 3 years. Policymakers are on a collision course with the future and with themselves. And here's the tragic irony: none of it's necessary. If economic growth and job creation was actually your intent, public education is the best investment in town. It pays off better than anything. Arizona can create more jobs with just a small, consistent, incremental increase in public education funding than it can show have been created from any tax cut you can name. Economists on both sides of the party divide agree. One of the best investments going is to invest in public education if economic growth is truly your goal. But you know the opposite happens. You know the cycle in Arizona. A tax cut passes, and instantly everybody starts talking about RIFs and the programs and the jobs that are going to be eliminated, as if it's some mystery. We don't have to be here. We don't have to be in this situation. When you hear folks say, well, you know, we've got no choice but to cut and cut and cut, the choices have already been made, and they were the wrong choices. And over the next few years, AEA will be relentless in driving that message about the sound economic principles, not to mention the ethical principles, of investing in public education. We're going to inject that into the public dialogue all the way across this state because we're right and we can prove it. And finally, the child is getting older in Arizona. The deliberate political move to convince Americans and Arizonans that somehow public schools, and therefore public school employees, are somehow the barrier to students receiving a quality education rather than the promise, has grown from its infancy with a nation at risk to its childhood in the 90s and is now hit acne-faced, raging hormone puberty. And that means that Governor Jan Brewer is the parent of a very spoiled child. Just 4 days ago, Governor Brewer signed into a law a bill that will effectively end payroll deduction for all union members across the state of Arizona. That's the product it will create. You're going to hear more about that today, and we're going to tell you what we're going to do about that as an organization, what we must do to counter what is a blatant attempt to quiet you, weaken our voice, and silence us in our ability to speak for Arizona's students and educators. Now, 3 examples, and I will tell you, I love irony. I love irony. Irony makes human beings fascinating. Irony is what led Mark Twain to say that human beings are the only animal who can blush and the only animals who have to. But somewhere you got to draw the line between irony and blatant hypocrisy, because hypocrisy is just a cheap shot. This is the same governor, after all, who a year ago implored every one of you to get out and pass Prop 100, and we did. You walked neighborhoods, you made phone calls, you stayed after school in meetings, you went around and talked to community members. You may have suffered through some fairly difficult conversations, but you did it. And that was an organized political campaign with resources and everything. And would you like to know the name of Senate Bill 1365, the nickname that followed it through the legislature? Protect Arizona Educators from Politics. You can't make that up. You cannot make that up. I now know what Governor Brewer was doing during those 17 seconds when she couldn't find anything to say in her first debate. She was thinking of this. I thought she just was wasting time. And so Jon Stewart wraps up another episode of The Daily Show, brought to you live from Arizona. Yes, Arizona has become, tragically and ethically, unrecognizable. So in this troubled, disillusioned, and really inhospitable political culture, it's very easy to see the world as Hamlet did. lose ourselves, lose the true sight of ourselves. And if we do that, that's the biggest modern day tragedy of all, to lose that sense of ourselves. Because your values are still at your core, and they are still crying out for a world which they can impact and which recognizes them. A fog has rolled across Arizona, there's no doubt about it, and it's thick. But we've got to see through it enough to see ourselves and each other clearly. We've got to recognize ourselves for who we truly are. I know that all around us are signs to the contrary, but you can't lose sight that we in public education are as vital to our students, to families, to decency, and to the future of Arizona as we have ever been. We still have a compact with the future. You can't sever the future from education. That future waits to be realized through every student we shape, and the future's going to write itself. There's no choice. The future will be written. And so we've got to be the co-authors with our students. It has been ever thus. So if this is your AEA, if it's truly your AEA, I have to ask you today, what is at your core? What is at your core still vibrating and resonating inside you? Ralph Waldo Emerson called the will inside us an iron string. He said the resonance of that string vibrating and resonating plays at what is most vital in our minds and hearts like a constant piano note resounding inside us. Everyone's iron string is different. I want you to think about what strikes at yours right now. What do you in education feel resonating inside you? What does it feel like to be in education in Arizona right now? Not in the headlines. Forget them. Not on the news. You can predict what's going to be on the news right now. I want to know about you and your psyche in the weekly evolution, the resounding cycle of a school week. That's where you find out what's really on people's minds. Trace it. From Monday morning, which really begins Sunday evening. Because you know, Monday morning isn't Monday morning. Monday morning is the second part of Sunday evening. You can feel the wave coming. You watch anybody in this room, you watch them over the course of a weekend. They're not the same person on Friday afternoon. We go across from Monday morning, across that week, ever reaching forward to that glorious pinnacle. A sacred spot perched delicately atop Friday afternoon. The ritual of happy hour. Happy hour. Happy hour. If you don't think those are the most powerful words in a school on a Friday, you go back next week. Then you try this. You say, hey, I hear there's a staff meeting after school. And then you say, oh, I'm sorry, I have it wrong. I hear there's a happy hour after school. See if there isn't a difference. We call it the agony and the ecstasy. We must always remember that those of us in public education may not have invented happy hour, but our industry has done much to perfect it. What does resonate inside you? On the way to work, in the morning, at home, at the end of the day. How much of your day is still rooted in the hope and faith that you will accomplish all that you have dreamed you could? How much? This is the question we've got to focus on today. Session's over. We breathe. But this is what we've got to focus on. How connected are you to your enormous contributions to your students? To how much of yourselves you give to them? Do you still burn? Do you still burn to ignite them right from inside? Do you still orient your day around their safety and their well-being To our ESP brothers and sisters, do you still understand that about 36 things have to go right at the beginning of every school day before teachers and students even engage, and you manage every single one of those things? Do you get that? I hope so. Are you still crazy enough to believe that your work and heart can make a difference? Or is somebody taking that from you? I don't think so. Best kind of crazy in the world is educator crazy. And I hope you're still educator crazy. It's the best there is. But it brings a risk. There is an inherent risk in being educator crazy because it's such a powerful, consuming calling. The stakes are so high. The trust is so important, and success is so complex. And when our current world falls so short of the dreams we hold for our students and families, aspirations that come from such a deep place within us for others, it hurts. It hurts. Yes, the current state of Arizona is far from what we know it can be and from what our students deserve. But when the dreams of those involved in the same pursuit are both shared and vital, then we form together. We form together in a collective pursuit of what we believe must be. We escape the current chaotic reality together, and we call it the AEA. But if we're going to drive the pursuit, if we really are going to transform reality into something better, then here's the thing. The same individuals who choose to unite in name and cause, AEA, must also unite in action. That's what we have to think about. It's for that reason that this is your AEA. AEA not only belongs to every member, AEA is every member. Has been ever thus. And the easiest thing in the world to do with any cause to which we belong is pretend that it's in the hands of somebody else. It happens all the time. It's human nature. Actions have to be taken, but they be taken by somebody else. Answers have to be owned. They can be owned by somebody else. We can't have that. We simply aren't there. It's a very common phenomenon, and when you add frustration and fear, the results can be freezing. But the pain isn't a sign that our cause is wrong. If you're in public education right now, if you care at all about people and you're paying attention, you're anything but satisfied with Arizona's current direction. It is the nature of us in education to want a better tomorrow and to build it one student and one day at a time. That defines our whole endeavor. Our students are our mural, a living mural, where we paint what must come. And the funny thing is, folks, that the closer you get to students, I mean you, all of you, the closer you get to your role with students, the more you become. You're artists and you're scientists, you're the ESP, you're MacGyvers, you're wizards. You make the system work. You can design any perfect system on paper. There's only one thing you got to do to foul it up. Add human beings. You don't believe me? Check your tardy policy at your school. Check the maintenance request forms and that policy. Any system can be perfect on paper. That's easy. We need to be the same in the organization. Magicians, wizards, artists, always acting. I believe we are capable of exactly that, of organizing this organization around the importance of its members, not as bystanders to the AEA, not as witnesses to the AEA, but as agents in the AEA, exactly as they are in the education and stewardship and well-being of students. And to do this, we simply need to put a few things in motion, some of which have already begun in the AEA. We need to continue our focus on organizing, a constant interplay of goal setting, listening to each other, planning, acting, and evaluating to see where we go next. We need to work toward engagement a special definition of engagement, taking the issues that we believe have got to be addressed, whether it's working conditions, certified or classified, teacher performance and support, and increasing our ability to effectively teach, the investment in schools that the state makes or should make, and the quality of the education. Whatever these are, we can translate them to their highest level of impact for our members. That's the orientation that creates engagement. It begins with meeting our members on the plane of what is really important to them. And we need action. Every campaign in the AEA ought to be about action. No organization by flyer or PowerPoint. No. No, no, no. Information is a valuable tool, but it can never substitute for compelling people to act. And I will tell you, I've seen a lot of PowerPoints. I've never seen one more powerful than you and your ability to reach out to your colleagues. And above all, we need an orientation of the NEA, the AEA, and locals as partners involved in the same endeavor. I want to see us spend less time debating which one is more important and understand the unique role and function that each level plays. That's the true essence of the vertical organization. The highest state of a relationship is not independence, it's interdependence. Somebody once said that. We need to remember that not all organizing opportunities are political. They don't have to be. We need to remember that right there in our buildings across the state are some of the most ripe potentials for organizing and engaging members. And it is within us. It is absolutely within us to do. We've already awakened an organizing culture across AEA, and organizing is messy and sloppy, and you make mistakes, and we're going to keep on doing it and keep on doing it until we get it right. But organizing that compels engagement and action and focuses on issues that are really the most relevant to people is where we need to be. To stay connected to the inestimable depth of our character and our values and our core, to know ourselves, and to connect as deeply as we can in the organization. Arizona is going to come out of these recessions. I know it. And when it does, economic or ethical, the path of the recovery will be laid on the foundation of our public schools. It will be through our hallways and classrooms that Arizona recovers, because it's there that the greatest demonstrations of character and benevolence are demonstrated, and they come from you. Your bearing is so much more intact than it may seem, and it can still provide the sense of direction and imperative that can move us. We're vulnerable. The AEA is vulnerable. The AEA is vulnerable because it's made up of people. And people are vulnerable. The AEA can know fear because people can know fear. Our members can know fear. So many people are afraid to show what they care most about. They think that showing that makes them weak. It doesn't. What we believe in to the point of pain doesn't make us weak. It gives us our bearing. It gives us our strength if we allow it to. There's never been a better example of this in all of education in my mind than in 2002. In the fall, I was in one of my first years as treasurer, and I went to the NEA board meeting, and an announcement came over that a sniper, there wasn't much information known, but I know you know this story. If you think back to the D.C. shootings and the pair who killed many, and that story broke across the media, and the NEA board meeting was going on at the time. It wasn't until weeks later that another story emerged. A school in Fairfax County, Virginia, was written about in the media because a little girl went home from school at the end of the day of one of the shootings, and her parents asked her, well, you know, was there any talk of this? And she said, well, yeah, there was, but something happened at the beginning of the day. And they said, well, what? And she said, well, as the buses pulled up, a human tunnel formed of the faculty and the staff that stretched from where each bus unloaded and went all the way to the front doors of the building. It was made up of the teachers and the faculty and the staff of the school. And the students passed through that tunnel. And they were shielded from harm by their teachers and their maintenance workers and their attendance clerks. Nobody called that together. No, there was no meeting. There was no flyer. The folks just showed up, and they made of their own bodies a shield. Now, Hamlet said something else. He said, "I am myself indifferent honest." And I've always wondered what that means. I think what it means is he was trying to tell the person he was kind of berating at the moment, I'm not any better than anybody else. I am myself indifferent honest. I have my good moments, I have my bad. But I know you. And if you imagine that that action of those educators on that day was somehow outside of yourself, I can tell you it wasn't. What they did was not genetic, and it wasn't geographic. It was automatic. And you do it. You'd be locking arms with those people, walking up to shield those students before you even knew you were doing it. Because that's who you are. And your students would walk in the safety carved out by your character, just like they do every day. There are threats around us, and it's going to be hard for a while in this state. No two ways about it. But please do not lose sight of what's inside you, because it's such a loss. And it's a loss that we can't bear. The fire inside you that wants to ignite souls around you, it isn't all you have, and it isn't all you need. But it's a damn good place to start from as we walk forward and create a better world. And we can do it. I, as your colleague, along with thousands of your fellow AEA members, leading our students with us, want to walk with you. Much obliged. Much obliged. Thank you.